A new chapter. Former FBI Director James Comey's new book paints an unflattering picture of President Trump, but the White House strikes back. We have the latest.
Do you consider yourself to be pro-life now?
Yes, Senator, I am pro-life.
Questions of faith. Senators attack the Christian beliefs of two nominees in their Capitol Hill testimony. We have reaction. Pro-life battle. We talk with a bioethicist from Ireland who takes us inside the country's fight over whether to legalize abortion. And discovering your vocation. A couple engaged to be married finds God has other plans for them. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, April 13th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump slams James Comey as the former FBI director prepares to release his tell-all book. It depicts the president as unethical and, quote, untethered to the truth. Firing back, the president calls Comey an untruthful slimeball. White House correspondent Mark Irons is following the feud. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. The former FBI director's 304-page memoir will be released next week, but the president isn't waiting until then to issue his review, and Comey isn't shying away from sharing his story.
It's called A Higher Loyalty. Some say you can't judge a book by its cover, but the White House does judge the book by its author.
We find that Mr. Comey has a revisionist view of history and seems like a disgruntled ex-employee. After all, he was fired. It's not as if he came to the conclusions that are in his book while he was on the job as FBI director.
Comey's conclusions include this. He says Donald Trump's presidency threatens much of what is good in this nation. He compares the president to a mob boss, calling Trump's leadership of the country ego-driven and about personal loyalty, and describes a newly elected President Trump as being fixated on debunking salacious rumors he said were untrue but still might distress his wife. Comey says the president asked him, "Can you imagine me? Hookers?" Comey describes him as the unethical leader behind the forest fire that is the Trump presidency. Republicans fire back, releasing a video that says even Democrats don't believe Comey.
The FBI director has no credibility.
Comey will be forever known as a disgraced partisan hack that broke his sacred trust with the President of the United States, the dedicated agents of the FBI, and the American people he vowed to faithfully serve.
And Trump shares his strong opinion on Twitter, writing, James Comey is a proven leaker and liar. Virtually everyone in Washington thought he should be fired for the terrible job he did until he was, in fact, fired. He leaked classified information for which he should be prosecuted. He lied to Congress under oath. He is a weak and untruthful slimeball who was, as time has proven, a terrible director of the FBI. His handling of the crooked Hillary Clinton case and the events surrounding it will go down as one of the worst botched jobs of history. It was my great honor to fire James Comey.
And late this afternoon, President Trump sent another tweet. He said former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe also lied and was controlled by Comey. The president calls them a, quote, den of thieves and lowlifes. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. And we'll take a closer look at the Trump-Comey dispute coming up later in the show with the Daily Caller's Christopher Bedford. President Trump says he may reopen talks on a trade deal with Pacific Rim countries known as the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He pulled the U.S. out of it shortly after taking office. On Twitter, he says would only join TPP if the deal were substantially better than the deal offered to President Obama. We already have bilateral deals with 6 of the 11 nations in TPP and are working to make a deal with the biggest of those nations, Japan, who has hit the U.S. hard on trade for years. The president pardoned Scooter Libby, the former top aide to then Vice President Dick Cheney. Libby was convicted in 2007 of obstruction of justice and lying to FBI investigators. The case stemmed from a probe into the leak of the covert identity of CIA officer Valerie Plame. His conviction was criticized by conservatives. They believe Libby was the victim of a politically motivated special counsel. The president says, "For years I have heard that he had been treated unfairly." Vice President Mike Pence departs Washington, D.C. for the Summit of the Americas in Peru. Pence is traveling in place of President Trump, who is staying in Washington in order to manage the U.S. response to an apparent chemical weapons attack on civilians in Syria. The conference began more than 2 decades ago as a way to promote free trade, democracy, and human rights. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations insists the Syrian government is responsible for the alleged toxic gas attack, but Nikki Haley says President Trump has not decided on how to respond.
You don't rush decisions like this. If you rush decisions like this, you make a mistake. What we're making sure is that we have all the information to know if we do something, what will happen, how will it happen, and will it hurt anyone.
Haley adds, as the wife of a former U.S. serviceman, she's unbelievably proud of how the president is handling the situation. This week on Capitol Hill, Democrats probe Trump nominees about abortion and homosexuality. Mike Pompeo is the president's pick for Secretary of State, and Wendy Vitter is a district judge nominee. Senators took aim at both during contentious confirmation hearings. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi followed them both closely. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. Mike Pompeo was grilled about his personal views on marriage, and Wendy Vitter, who's the general counsel for the Archdiocese of New Orleans, also answered tough questions about her pro-life views. It's the new normal that Christian conservatives face in the public square. I should warn you, some of the language you're about to hear is graphic.
So you do not believe it's appropriate for two gay people to marry?
Senator, I continue to hold that view.
It's yes or no. Do you believe gay sex is a perversion?
Senator, I'm going to give you the same answer I just gave you previously. My respect for every individual, regardless of their sexual orientation, is the same.
Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey was referencing a 2015 speech where Pompeo quoted this church's pastor.
And we'd endorsed perversion and called it an alternative lifestyle. We've shot abortionists and called it justifiable.
More tough questions for another Trump nominee, Wendy Vitter, picked to serve as a district judge.
I assume that we were referring to aborted fetuses who are females. Is that what you were referring to when you said Planned Parenthood kills 150,000 females a year?
That is correct. I believe so, Senator.
Vitter promised to uphold the law and precedent despite her personal views, but the interrogation went on.
Do you consider yourself to be pro-life now?
Yes, Senator, I am pro-life.
I pressed Connecticut Democrat Richard Blumenthal on his line of questioning.
Does it matter what her personal views are on abortion? Because you kept asking her what she personally believes on that issue.
Her personal beliefs are her own. She's entitled to them. But she also has a responsibility to state clearly that the Supreme Court correctly decided Roe v. Wade or Brown versus Board of Education. And her failure to do so indicates a lapse of conviction and conscience that are inappropriate for a federal judge.
Terry Schilling of the conservative group American Principles Project calls this questioning a witch hunt. Schilling says it should wake up Christians across America and get them off the political sidelines. Wyatt?
Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. Advocates for religious freedom in China are reacting to historic negotiations between Beijing and the Holy See under Pope Francis.
A lot of Catholics in the underground movement feel very betrayed and hurt by his actions. They feel that all of the sacrifices that they have made as activists living in China have been undervalued by the Vatican.
For years, China's Catholics have been split between the state-run church and the underground church, which is loyal to the Pope. The Vatican hopes to heal divisions. Much of the tension revolves around who has the right to appoint bishops. Thousands of Palestinians protest along the Israeli-Gaza border in the third mass rally in just 2 weeks. At least 9 Palestinians were reported wounded. Since late March, 27 Palestinians have been killed and hundreds more wounded by Israeli army fire. Israel says it has the right to defend its border. Top Israeli officials say Hamas has been encouraging Palestinians to carry out provocative behavior like burning tires and firing guns. Prince Philip leaves a London hospital where he's been recovering from a hip replacement surgery. He's expected to go through rehab and will use crutches for several weeks. The 96-year-old retired from public service last year. Lawmakers in Croatia approved an international treaty on women's rights despite fierce opposition and protests from the Catholic Church. Opponents in the majority Catholic country have argued that the treaty undermines traditional values and indirectly legalizes same-sex marriage. 8 victims of clergy sex abuse are asking the Legion of Christ for compensation. They were victims of the religious order's founder, who was a pedophile. They allege the Mexico-based order discredited them publicly. The group says it will try to get in touch personally with each of the victims and respond to their requests. Ireland will hold a referendum May 25th on whether to lift a constitutional ban on most abortions. Voters will be asked whether they want to retain the pro-life 8th Amendment to Ireland's constitution or repeal it. The upcoming vote has set off a fierce debate. Last month, some Irish protesters took to the streets to support a repeal. The 1983 amendment created a constitutional recognition of right to life of the unborn. Ever since, abortion is legal only in rare cases when a woman's life is in danger. Our next guest comes from County Clare and got her doctorate at the Pontifical University in Rome. Joining us now with more on the implications of the Irish referendum is bioethicist Kathleen Laheef. She joins us from Rome. Kathleen, you're an Irish citizen teaching in Rome. Are you planning to go back to Ireland to vote, and how do you think this vote impacts you personally?
I am Irish at heart, always will be. I live in Rome at the moment, but yes, I am definitely deciding to go home to vote. I'm already registered and I will be there.
Can you talk us through the ethical problems with the referendum?
Oh, there are many. I don't think we have time to go through all of the ethical problems, but the origins of this legislation and this referendum go back 35 years. We have flawed legislation already in place in Ireland ever since the 1992 X-case situation. That was a situation where a very young, vulnerable girl was found to be pregnant after an abusive case, and she took the case to court to get an abortion based on the precept that they thought she was suicidal. From that landmark case, a little bit like the Roe versus Wade case, we then began the debate on abortion for real, and it has continued until today. So in fact, the ethical problem we have is that many of these very hard cases have been brought forward, have been taken to court, and the court has not been a safe place. The court has actually been the public square, the arena. The media ended up being, the judge and the jury on many of these cases. So our problem is now we have a medical situation in Ireland in which if a pregnant mother is suicidal, she can go to any doctor and say, I'm suicidal, therefore my child has to die because that's the right treatment for me.
Kathleen, you're in the medical field. What will be the impact if abortion is expanded in Ireland?
As medical professionals, my concern is we are midwives who are called to bring life forth, to help give birth. As a midwife, it means you're between the wife, you're with the wife, you're with the woman. So as a compassionate woman, when I see another woman in difficulty or in crisis, what do? Do I offer her life? Do I offer her hope? Do I offer her another road? Or do I just say, you know what? You're right, this pregnancy maybe is a disease for you. Your fertility is in fact an illness, a disease. So let's just get rid of this because it's not the right time for you. And you're wasting my time, I'm wasting your time, let's just get rid of it. And so we have dehumanized what pregnancy is. As a midwife, I'm very concerned about the effect this has on young women and on mothers, but also on the fathers. The abortion question, you see, isn't just a private individual choice. It touches the whole family. It touches a future father. It touches future grandparents. It touches future siblings of that very lady who is pregnant at the moment and who is in difficulty. So we need to offer other opportunities. Abortion is not the answer. It never will be.
It's incredible to think there are so many moral and ethical implications from one particular referendum in Ireland. Know that we'll be praying for that referendum. Kathleen Laheef, bioethicist, joining us from Rome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, a somber anniversary as Israel recognizes the Holocaust. And Pope Francis gives the faithful advice on achieving true freedom. This week, Israel marked its Holocaust Remembrance Day in honor of the 6 million Jews killed by Nazi Germany during World War II. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says standing up to evil and aggression is a mission imposed on every generation. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump calls that time one of the darkest periods in the history of the world. The president says in a proclamation, we have a responsibility to convey the lessons of the Holocaust to future generations, and together as Americans, we have a moral obligation to combat anti-Semitism, confront hate, and prevent genocide. As we have told you earlier, former FBI Director James Comey has a tell-all book coming out next week. It is the latest account painting President Trump in an unflattering light. Joining us now is Christopher Bedford, editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller and author of his own book on the president, The Art of the Donald. Chris, welcome back. The president and James Comey both had strong language here. So do you think this new tell-all book by Comey really is going to damage the president in the long term?
Not based on anything I've read. It was kind of difficult last night to tell the difference between excerpts from the book and satire on the book. But Comey seems to so far more be defending himself, and he also is really just, it's a self-absorbed book by everything I've seen. It's more of what we've seen, and it doesn't include anything particularly explosive.
Okay, we'll continue to watch this feud between the president and Comey, but I want to switch to another issue that we've been following today, which is Christian nominees who have been under fire for their personal beliefs on issues like abortion, marriage, especially this week with these confirmation hearings and stuff like this. Do you think that the way they've been probed is a form of discrimination?
Yeah, and it's a broader trend, and it shows exactly where the left is and what Catholic voters and Christian voters are thought of. One of the most amazing and insightful things I've seen on this is a New York Times article that came out last week. It was about how Health and Human Services had declined an abortion, to provide abortion on government funds to an underage legal immigrant. They said that that was a normal thing to do, to provide that abortion, and they listed the guy's membership as in the Knights of Columbus as proof that he was a radical outside of the norm. That's what's believed in New York, and that's what's believed by a lot of the Democrats in D.C.
Obviously not necessarily shared by mainstream Americans.
No.
Also want to switch to one other topic that we've been following today. There was a new report by the Justice Department Inspector General who said that fired FBI Director Andrew McCabe misled investigators. What are kind of the takeaways of that, and what do you think about the timing here?
Well, this was exciting because throughout this entire probe, we've been going off of Democrats and Republicans' letters about what they've seen. And we've seen almost very, very little primary source documents. Finally, we've got the FBI's Inspector General report, or the DOJ Inspector General report on what McCabe did. They said that he lied to Comey. They said that they'd leaked, and it wasn't, it's very, very damaging to him, that he'd leaked not to help the Bureau, but to damage the Bureau to his own benefit, to get himself out of trouble when he was accused in newspaper reports of being biased and of trying to protect the Clintons and trying to protect his wife. He leaked this information, and then when questioned on it by Comey and then questioned on it under oath, lied about it, or lacked candor, as they said. And it really paints a different picture from what he's tried to do since then by painting himself as a martyr, the Washington Post printing his op-ed immediately after he was fired. It's a direct path to the media. This report does not look good for McCabe.
And like I said, it's been some things that people have been suspicious of him for a while. Now more things just coming to light about it. Christopher Bedford, editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller, thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
The most restrictive abortion law in the country will remain on hold for several more months. The Mississippi law banning abortion after 15 weeks went into effect in March. The state's only abortion clinic immediately sued, and a district judge put a hold on it the next day. Earlier this week, that judge extended the temporary restraining order until October. Up next, going to the chapel. A couple engaged to be married opts to take vows of a different kind. And music to move you. We talk with a member of the Sistine Chapel Choir ahead of their tour of the U.S.
La mia libertà è cristiana. Sono libero.
Pope Francis says Christ gives the faithful true freedom. At his daily Mass in the Vatican, the Holy Father says being free means making room for God in our lives. He also says people who follow God are patient and let Him do the work. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The Pope's choir is returning to America. That's the sound of the Sistine Chapel Choir. It dates back to the 15th century. Last year, I reported on the group's first tour in the United States when they performed in Washington, D.C. This year, they're preparing to go coast to coast. Joining us now is Mark Spiropoulos. He is the first Englishman since the Reformation to be hired as a full-time singer with the Sistine Chapel Choir. He joins us from New York, where he is promoting the upcoming tour. Mark, welcome back to the program. What can we expect in this year's tour? What will be the same? What will be different?
It's a full coast-to-coast tour, taking in 8 cities, and it's a concert tour. And we are bringing to you some of the finest music from the Vatican and from the archives that go back to the 16th century. Really some of the most extraordinary music right across America.
And you'll be performing in cities like Atlanta, St. Louis, Los Angeles. How do you prepare to perform in theaters and churches where the acoustics are so different than, for example, inside the Sistine Chapel?
Well, we're very used to performing in a variety of different acoustic settings. So the music, of course, is centered around the Sistine Chapel, and that's what it was written for. But we have to, of course, bring something of the feeling of the Sistine Chapel. And it's very different when we perform in the Basilica, for example, in St. Peter's, or if we're out in the Piazza. And then when we tour, of course, we then have to make allowances and justify the sound in other different theatres. We would rehearse during the day, of course, and set the balances slightly. In some of the bigger venues, we use a kind of amplification, but we always try to recreate as far as we can the natural and very beautiful acoustic of the Sistine Chapel itself.
What's it like to be on the road for so long? What's your schedule like, and how hectic is it?
I haven't seen this schedule yet, but it's going to be pretty heavy, isn't it? It's almost all of July, and it's 8 cities. So we, of course, have to keep ourselves fresh. We have to keep the voices in check. We have to make sure we're well rested. And so we have to be very, very careful each time that we kind of pace ourselves as we go along. Otherwise, we're going to sound awful by the end. So we have to be very careful about how we look after ourselves.
You say that the choir is called to connect people of different faiths. So what do you hope people will take away from the choir's performances when they hear it?
I think our job is to bring to America the spiritual intensity of the Sistine Chapel, the transcendent beauty which is at the heart of the Vatican. We bring the music which reflects those famous and beautiful frescoes of Michelangelo. We are bringing that tradition in music to America. And I think that should be something that should inspire people to look beyond the everyday and the mundane to something beautiful and transcendent. That's, I think, our job, and nothing less than that.
Well, I'm sure there'll be a lot of American Catholics who are praying for you guys as you guys tour America and bring that music to the lives of so many. Mark Sparopoulos of the Sistine Chapel Choir, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Tickets for the tour are now on sale. You can get information at SistineChapelChoirTour.com. A recent study by Gallup says church attendance among Catholics continues to slide. The study finds only 39%, less than 4 out of 10 Catholics, say they go to Mass at least once a week. That number, tallied between 2014 to 2017, is down from 45%, less than a decade before. Compare that to 1955, when 3/4 said they went to weekly Mass. Gallup also finds there is no current age group with at least 50% weekly attendance. Nearly 1 in 10 men on course for ordination was homeschooled. Those findings are from Georgetown University's Center for Applied Research at the Apostolate. The study also finds 40% of men preparing to become priests attended a Catholic college. A Catholic couple in Argentina engaged to be married made it to the church, but not in the way they originally planned. Javier and Marie instead discovered a different vocation. They are now Father Javier and Sister Marie. Javier says he had considered entering the seminary while they were dating. Marie also thought about being a nun. The two heard their calling as they attended Mass and prayed the Rosary together. The two are still friends, and so are their families. Glad to hear that always will share that part of their journey to their calling. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back here Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.